I saw something today I should never have seen. My own son Marcus, the man I raised with so much love, rifling through my documents like a thief in my own home. And the worst part is, he doesn't know I saw him. He doesn't know the security camera I sent to be repaired is working perfectly again. It all started 3 days ago when I called the technician to fix the surveillance system. It had been broken for weeks, and I felt vulnerable. A 68-year-old woman living alone after Marcus and his wife, Angelica, insisted on moving in with me to take better care of me. How bitterly ironic. I completely forgot to mention to them that I'd hired someone for the repair. I was so used to them controlling every aspect of my life that it simply slipped my mind. But thank God it did, because otherwise I would have discovered the truth too late. This morning, after Marcus supposedly left for a job interview and Angelica went to the grocery store, I decided to check if the cameras were working on my phone. The app the technician had installed let me see the whole house in real time. At first, I thought about testing it later, but something urged me to do it immediately. I tapped the screen, and there they were, crystal clear images of my living room. My heart stopped. Marcus and Angelica hadn't gone anywhere. They were right there in my living room with all my documents scattered across the coffee table as if it were their personal office. Marcus held my folder of important papers, the one I always kept locked in my bedroom desk. Angelica held papers, examining them one by one in the light from the window. They moved with the familiarity of people who had done this before. "Where's the original deed?" I heard Angelica's voice through the camera's audio. Her tone was cold, calculating. "Albert told us he specifically needs the original document to make the forgery believable." Albert. That name sent a chill down my spine. He was a lawyer Marcus had met at some bar, a shady-looking guy who had always given me a bad feeling. Now I understood why. "It has to be here," Marcus replied, his voice heavy with frustration. "Mom is so meticulous with these things. She keeps everything meticulously organized." That word came from his lips as if it were a curse. The same order and care he had always praised me for, he was now using against me. Angelica moved closer to the window, holding a document up to the light. "Look at this, Marcus. It says the house is worth more than $500,000, according to the last appraisal. Albert was right. It's worth all this effort." The house I bought with the sweat of 30 years of work as a nurse, the house where I raised Marcus after his biological father abandoned us when he was just 5 years old. The house I planned to leave him as an inheritance, not a prize for him to steal while I was still alive. "Once we have the deed in our name," Angelica continued, "we can sell and move her into something smaller. A 1-bedroom apartment will be enough for her last years." Her last years. They were talking about me as if I were already dead, as if I were just an obstacle to be removed on their path to prosperity. Marcus walked toward my bedroom. I watched him through another camera as he opened drawer after drawer, searching desperately. "She has to have a safe deposit box or something. She was always so paranoid about important documents." Paranoid. Another word that once meant protection, now turned into a flaw. He came back to the living room with empty hands and a face flushed with frustration. Angelica was waiting, arms crossed, clearly annoyed by the delay. "Albert gave us until Friday to get the original deed," she told him. "Without it, he can't do the job, and without the job, we'll keep living on the crumbs your mother gives us." Crumbs. She called the $700 a month I gave them for their personal expenses crumbs. Money I took from my modest pension to keep the peace in the house. Money that apparently wasn't enough for their ambition. "We'll pressure her more," Marcus said, slumping onto my favorite armchair. "We'll tell her they're medical insurance papers, something urgent she needs to sign. She's been so confused lately she won't even read what she's signing." Confused? It was true that sometimes it took me longer to remember names or dates, something completely normal at my age, but they had been cultivating that narrative, making me doubt my own mental clarity every time I questioned their decisions. "What if she gets suspicious?" Angelica asked. Marcus shrugged with an indifference that broke my heart. What's she going to do? Call the police on her own son? Besides, once we sign the papers with Albert, it'll be too late to reverse the process. Angelica smiled for the first time in the entire conversation. It was a cruel, satisfied smile. Perfect! Then tomorrow, we'll bring her Albert's forged documents and tell her it's for updating her will. She'll sign without asking questions. They got up to put my documents away, but not as they had found them. They stacked them carelessly, without the order I always maintained. It was as if they weren't even trying to hide that they had been snooping. Before leaving the room, Marcus stopped and looked directly at where the camera was installed. For a moment, I thought he had discovered me, that he knew I was watching them, but he just stood there, thoughtful. "I wish we didn't have to do this," he murmured, more to himself than to Angelica. "Are you getting cold feet?" she asked, her tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. "No, but—" Marcus sighed deeply. "She's my mom, Angelica, the woman who raised me alone, who worked double shifts to give me everything I needed." For a moment, a microscopic flash of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe there was something left of the boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares. Maybe there was still salvation for us. But Angelica walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, honey, think about our future. Think about the kids we want to have. Are we going to depend on an old woman who gets more senile every day? This house is our chance to be independent, to build something of our own." And just like that, with those venomous words, the last vestige of my good son disappeared. I watched his expression harden again, as greed once again took over his features. "You're right," he finally said. "It's time to think about us." They left the room, and I stayed there, sitting in the kitchen, watching my phone screen as if it were a horror movie. But it wasn't fiction. It was my real life falling apart before my eyes. For 35 years, I had built that man. I fed him, clothed him. I educated him, comforted him in his failures, and celebrated his triumphs. I worked until I was exhausted to pay for his college. I gave up rebuilding my own romantic life to focus on him. And now my greatest creation had become my greatest betrayal. But there was something Marcus and Angelica didn't know, something that would turn them from hunters into prey without them even realizing it. I had all their conversations recorded. I had the evidence of their criminal conspiracy, and for the first time in months, I had the power to decide my own destiny. The war had just begun, and they didn't even know they had already lost. Over the next 3 days, I lived a double life I never imagined possible. On one hand, I was the same old woman, the loving mother who made breakfast, asked about their plans, and smiled when Marcus kissed my forehead before leaving. On the other hand, I was an undercover detective in my own home, documenting every move, every conversation, every piece of evidence of the greatest betrayal of my life. Technology had become my secret ally. The app the technician installed on my phone gave me access to the cameras 24 hours a day. I could see the living room, the kitchen, the main hallway, even part of the room Marcus and Angelica had made their private sanctuary. On Tuesday morning, I saw them planning their next steps. Angelica was sitting on my couch with her laptop open and several papers scattered around her. Marcus was pacing, clearly nervous. "Albert says he has the documents ready," Angelica informed him, reading something on the screen. "But he needs us to bring the original deed to make the final signature comparisons." "What if Mom notices it's missing?" Marcus asked, biting his nails, a habit he'd had since he was a child that I had always tried to correct. Angelica looked up with that cold smile I was getting to know too well. "Marcus, your mother is 68 years old. She hasn't looked at those documents in months. Besides, we can just borrow it for a few hours and return it before she even notices." Borrow it. They talked about stealing the deed to my house as if it were a library book. But what if— Marcus stopped mid-sentence and looked toward the kitchen, where I was supposedly making lunch. "What if what?" Angelica insisted. "What if she gets suspicious? I've noticed her being more attentive lately, like she's watching us." My heart raced. Had I been so obvious? Had they discovered me? Angelica laughed with disdain. "Marcus, please. Your mother spends most of the day watching her soap operas and talking to herself. If she were so attentive, she would have noticed you've been lying about looking for a job for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So he hadn't even been looking for a job as he had told me. It was all part of their act to keep me calm while they executed their plan. You're right, Marcus admitted, though his voice still sounded uncertain. It's just, I don't know. I feel like she's judging me all the time. That's your fault, Angelica retorted coldly. You still see that woman as your saintly mother instead of seeing her for what she really is, an obstacle to our future. An obstacle. The word rang in my head like a funeral bell. For the woman my son had chosen as his life partner, I wasn't a person. I was simply something to be removed from their path. Besides, Angelica continued, closing the laptop with a thud, once we have the house, we can look for a decent retirement home for her, something affordable but comfortable. With the $500,000 from the sale, we can invest in our own business, and we'd still have plenty left over to take care of her properly. Retirement home. The phrase hit me like a hammer to the chest. They wanted to sell my house and lock me in an institution with the money from my own property. The cruelty of their plan was so refined, it almost seemed professional. Marcus sat down next to her, and for the first time in days, he seemed to relax. You really think it'll work? Albert's done this before, Angelica replied, stroking his hair as if he were a small child. He says he has a contact at the public registry who can fast-track the property transfer. The house will be in our names in 2 weeks, tops. 2 weeks. They had everything timed with military precision. And the money? Marcus asked. Albert charges $25,000 for the whole process. It's expensive, but think about it. We're talking about a net profit of over $100,000. It's a worthwhile investment. $25,000, the price they had put on my trust, my home, my dignity as a mother. For the rest of the day, I acted with superhuman normalcy. I cooked their favorite meals. I asked about their plans. I even offered them extra money to go to the movies. Every smile I forced onto my lips physically hurt, but I needed time to process what I had discovered and plan my next move. That night, when they finally went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and my phone. I reviewed all the recordings from the day, taking mental notes of every important detail. I had complete conversations where they confessed their criminal plan. I had dates, names, specific amounts. I had enough evidence to destroy their lives if I wanted to. But something stopped me from calling the police immediately. Maybe it was the last sliver of hope that Marcus would come to his senses. Maybe it was my need to fully understand how far they were willing to go. Or maybe, in the depths of my heart, I needed a direct confrontation before taking irreversible action. Wednesday dawned with a light rain that beat against the windows like tears from heaven. Marcus and Angelica had breakfast in silence, exchanging complicit glances that I pretended not to notice. There was a different tension in the air, as if something important was about to happen. "Mom," Marcus said after finishing his coffee, "we need to talk to you about something important." Here it was, the moment they had been preparing for. "Of course, my love," I replied, sitting across from them at the dining table. "What is it about?" Angelica cleared her throat and placed a folder I didn't recognize on the table. "Marisol, we've been thinking about your future, about your financial security." "My financial security?" I asked, genuinely confused by the direction of the conversation. "Yes," Marcus intervened, taking my hand with that fake tenderness that now made me sick. "We've been looking into wills, medical insurance, that kind of important thing every person your age should have in order." Angelica opened the folder and took out several documents that looked official. "A lawyer friend of Marcus's helped us prepare some papers to update all your legal documentation. They're standard forms, nothing complicated." Albert. It had to be him who had prepared those fraudulent documents. "What kind of documents?" I asked, feigning the naivety they expected from me. "Basically, it's to ensure that if anything happens to you," Marcus explained, Both your will and the ownership of the house are legally in order. It also includes an authorization for us to handle your medical and financial affairs if you ever can't do it yourself. Authorization to handle my affairs. They wanted me to sign over a complete power of attorney over my life. "It's for your own good, Marisol," Angelica added in a syrupy voice. "Imagine if you had an accident or a serious illness. Without these papers, Marcus couldn't help you with anything legal." They handed me the documents, and I could see they were full of complicated legal terms, entire paragraphs in small print that were intentionally difficult to read and understand, but I managed to make out a few keywords: transfer, assignment of rights, irrevocable power. "I don't really understand all of this," I said, holding the papers and feigning confusion. "Could you explain it to me more slowly?" I saw a flash of impatience cross Angelica's face, but Marcus maintained his compassionate smile. "Mom, they're boring technical things," he said. "The important thing is that you sign here, here, and here." He pointed to several lines marked with small X's. "The lawyer says it's urgent because there are changes in tax laws that could affect you if you don't update these documents before next month." Lies. It was all a convoluted lie to pressure me into signing without reading. "What if I want to read everything first?" I asked. "I'm a slow reader, but I like to understand what I'm signing." Angelica's mask of patience began to crack. "Marisol, it's over 20 pages of legal jargon. It would take you days to fully understand. And as Marcus said, it's urgent." "Besides," Marcus added, "we trust that the lawyer did everything correctly. He's a very respected professional." Respected. Albert, the man who, by their own words, had done this kind of fraud before. "Well," I finally said, putting the papers on the table, "let me think about it until tomorrow. It's a very important decision, and I want to be sure." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Marcus and Angelica exchanged a look of alarm they tried to hide. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice taking on a firmer tone, "we really need you to sign today. The lawyer gave us an appointment for early tomorrow, and if we don't bring the signed documents, we'll lose the opportunity." "What opportunity?" I asked. Angelica leaned forward, her patience finally exhausted. "The opportunity to protect you legally, Marisol. Don't you trust us? Don't you trust your own son?" There it was, the emotional manipulation they had been saving as their final card, turning my caution into a matter of family trust. "Of course I trust you," I lied, picking up the pen Marcus had placed next to the documents. "I just wanted to be sure." I watched them immediately relax. Their faces lit up with a mix of relief and triumphant anticipation. They thought they had won. I held the pen over the first signature line and stopped. "You know what? I'm going to call my doctor first to ask if this could affect my medical insurance." "Mom!" Marcus exploded, completely losing his composure for the first time. "You don't need to call anyone, just sign the damn papers!" The shout echoed through the house like a gunshot. In that moment, I knew I had gone too far. I couldn't keep pretending. The war had officially begun. Marcus's shout still rang in my ears when I saw his true face for the first time in years. There was no longer a mask of a loving son, no fake smiles, no sweet words, only a man who was desperate and furious because his victim was resisting being devoured. "Marcus?" I whispered, dropping the pen on the table. "Why are you yelling at me?" He immediately realized his mistake. I watched as he tried to recompose his facade, as he struggled to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The beast had shown its fangs. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, running his hands through his hair. "I've just been so stressed lately. The financial situation, the job hunt, it's all overwhelming." Angelica put a hand on his arm in a gesture that seemed reassuring, but I knew was a silent warning to control his temper. "What Marcus means," she intervened in a calm voice, "is that these legal procedures are very stressful for everyone. That's why it's better to get it over with and not prolong it unnecessarily." Unnecessarily. as if my caution were a senile whim and not the basic survival instinct of a woman who had just discovered that her own family was betraying her. "I understand you're stressed," I said, getting up from the table, "but I'm not signing anything until I'm completely sure what it means. I'm old, not an idiot." The words came out of my mouth with more force than I had used in months. I saw both of them stand still, surprised by my sudden firmness. "Nobody said you were an idiot," Marcus murmured, but his tone had a dangerous edge. "Then don't treat me like one," I replied. "These documents are staying here until I decide what to do with them." I took the papers from the table and put them in the first kitchen drawer I found. It was a symbolic gesture, of course, but I needed to show them I still had control over my own life. Marcus and Angelica stayed at the dining table, whispering so low I couldn't hear them. I retreated to my room under the pretense of taking a nap, but in reality, I wanted to review the recordings of the conversation I had just had. From the privacy of my locked room, I opened the app on my phone. There they were, still sitting in my dining room, but now they were talking in hushed, agitated tones. "This isn't going according to plan," Angelica said, clearly upset. "She was supposed to sign without asking questions." "She's been more suspicious lately," Marcus replied, "like she suspects something. Did you tell anyone about our plan?" "Of course not. I'm not stupid." Angelica was pensive for a moment, drumming her fingers on the table. "We need to change our strategy. If she won't sign the easy way, we'll have to pressure her another way." "What do you propose?" "Your mother depends on us financially for a lot of things, doesn't she? Private medical services, big grocery runs, extra expenses." "Yeah, but her pension covers the basics." "Exactly, the basics." Angelica smiled with malice. What would happen if those extra expenses suddenly disappeared? If she had to live solely on her pension? Marcus frowned, not fully understanding where the conversation was going. "Think about it," she continued. "Without our financial support, she'd have to cancel her private medical insurance, depend solely on the public system. Without our car, she'd have to take public transport or expensive taxis. Without our help with the shopping, she'd have to carry heavy bags all by herself." The perversity of their plan began to take shape before my eyes. They wanted to create an artificial crisis in my life to force me to become completely dependent on them. "It's brilliant," Marcus admitted, and the pride in his voice made me feel sick. "If we pressure her financially, she'll have no choice but to sign the documents to ensure our continued support." "Exactly. And if she resists, we just tell her we can't afford to help her because we don't have stable jobs, that we need legal certainty about our shared future to justify that emotional and financial investment." Investment. They talked about taking care of their mother as if it were a business with an expected return on capital. "How long do you think she'll hold out?" Marcus asked. A 68-year-old woman accustomed to a certain level of comfort, suddenly facing severe economic restrictions. Angelica shrugged. 2 weeks tops." 2 weeks. The same deadline they had mentioned earlier to complete the legal fraud. They got up from the table and went to their room. I heard them discussing the specific details of their economic pressure plan. They would cancel my supplemental medical insurance that very day. They would deny me use of the car for my doctor's appointments. They would stop doing the grocery shopping that required carrying heavy bags. It was a plan of economic abuse designed to break my psychological resistance. And the most terrifying part was how well thought out it was. They knew exactly what my vulnerable points were and how to attack them methodically. That afternoon, while I pretended to watch TV in the living room, I watched them execute the first phase of their new strategy. Marcus called the insurance company. "Yes, I want to cancel Marisol Jones's supplemental policy," I heard him say into the phone. "Effective immediately. Correct. I'm her son, and I have legal power for these transactions." Lie. He had no legal power over my affairs, but apparently the company didn't verify that information. Angelica, for her part, reviewed all the expenses they had been covering in recent months. She made a detailed list in her notebook: specialized medications, transportation to medical appointments, grocery shopping, occasional cleaning services. Tomorrow we start cutting all of this, she told Marcus when he came back from his phone call. And when she asks why, we tell her we're going through a financial crisis that prevents us from helping her as we used to. And what if she agrees to live with fewer comforts? She won't, Angelica replied with absolute confidence. I've been observing your mother for months. She's a woman accustomed to a certain order, a certain quality of life. When she feels all that is in danger, she'll sign whatever is necessary to regain stability. They were right about one thing. I was used to a certain level of life, but they were completely wrong to think I wasn't willing to sacrifice it to maintain my dignity and independence. That night, after they fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen to plan my own strategy. I had recordings of all their conspiracies, clear evidence of attempted fraud, and now also of elder abuse. But I still wasn't ready to involve the authorities. There was something inside me, maybe the maternal part that still hoped for a miracle, that needed to give Marcus one last chance to come to his senses. I wanted to confront him directly, show him that I knew everything about his plans, and see if there was anything left of the son I had raised. I decided that the next day I would put my own plan into action. If they wanted to play with psychological pressure, I would show them how someone with 68 years of life experience does it. But first, I needed to make sure all my evidence was backed up in multiple places. I copied all the videos and audio to a USB drive that I hid in a place they would never think to look. I also sent copies by email to an account I had created specifically for this purpose. If anything happened to me, if they somehow managed to incapacitate me legally or physically, at least there would be a complete record of their crimes. Thursday dawned with a bright sun that brutally contrasted with the darkness that had settled in my home. Marcus and Angelica had breakfast as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the tension, waiting for the right moment to explode. "Good morning, Mom," Marcus greeted me with false cheer. "Slept like a baby," I lied. In reality, I had spent most of the night awake, planning every detail of what was to come. "Perfect," Angelica said, "because today we need to talk to you about some changes in our financial situation." Here their show began. I sat at the breakfast table, feigning complete innocence about what they were about to tell me. "What kind of changes?" I asked, pouring coffee into my favorite mug. Marcus exchanged a meaningful look with Angelica before continuing. "Well, Mom, as you know, I've been looking for work for several weeks without success. Several weeks. Another euphemism for I haven't worked honestly in months. And unfortunately," Angelica added, "our savings are running out faster than we expected." Their savings. They had no savings. They lived entirely on my generosity, and we all knew it. "That means," Marcus continued, with a grave expression, "that we'll have to make some temporary adjustments to the household expenses." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, though I already knew the answer perfectly. "Well, things like your supplemental medical insurance, using the car for non-urgent appointments, some of the extra expenses we've been covering." Marcus paused dramatically. "They're temporary measures, of course, until we find a more permanent solution." A more permanent solution? They were referring to stealing my house. "I see," I said simply, taking a sip of coffee. "And what would that permanent solution be?" Angelica leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Well, Marisol, if we signed those legal documents from yesterday, we could have the legal security necessary to make long-term investments in our family situation." Long-term investments. Selling my house and locking me in a retirement home. "I see," I replied, remaining perfectly calm. "So the documents from yesterday weren't just for my legal protection." They froze. I had just shown that I had perfectly understood the connection between their economic blackmail and the fraudulent papers. "Mom," Marcus began, "we just want what's best for everyone." "No," I interrupted, getting up from the table. "You want what's best for you, and you're willing to destroy your own mother to get it." The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, after days of acting, I had laid all my cards on the table. The war was no longer secret. It was open, declared, and without quarter. The silence in the kitchen spread like an oil slick. Marcus and Angelica looked at me with a mix of shock and calculation, as if they were completely reevaluating their opponent. I was no longer the naive mother they had been manipulating. I was a woman who had discovered their game and was ready to confront them. "Mom," Marcus finally said, his voice filled with a fake concern that was now repulsive to me. "I think you're misinterpreting our intentions." "Oh, really?" I replied, crossing my arms. "Then explain to me why your financial crisis perfectly coincides with your need for me to sign documents you won't let me read." Angelica intervened with that condescending smile she had perfected during months of manipulation. "Marisol, I understand you might feel confused by all this complex legal information." "I'm not confused," I cut her off sharply. "I'm betrayed." The word landed on the table like a bomb. I saw Marcus physically flinch, as if he was finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had been doing. "Betrayed," I repeated, savoring each syllable. "By the son I raised alone, who I fed with my own labor, who I educated by sacrificing my own comfort. The son who now wants to steal my house while I sleep." "I don't want to steal anything from you," Marcus exploded, hitting the table with his fist. "Everything I do is thinking about our shared future." "Our future?" I laughed bitterly. "Marcus, your plan includes putting me in a retirement home with the money from my own house. In what part of that plan am I included as family and not as an obstacle?" Angelica and Marcus exchanged a look of alarm. I had just shown them I knew more than they had calculated. "I don't know where you get these ideas," Angelica murmured, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. "Ideas?" I took my phone out of my pocket and put it on the table. "Do you want me to remind you of your exact words about finding something affordable but comfortable for my last years?" The color completely drained from their faces. Marcus looked at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. You weren't recording us," he whispered. "No," I replied with deadly calm. "You were recording yourselves. You forgot that the security camera I sent to be repaired is working perfectly, and you forgot to tell me you were going to confess all your criminal plans in my own living room." Angelica got up abruptly, knocking her chair over. "How long have you been spying on us?" "Since Tuesday," I admitted without flinching. 3 full days of recordings where you confess your conspiracy to forge my signature, steal my house, and get rid of me. I have complete conversations about Albert, the $25,000 for the fraud, and your plans to sell the property. Marcus stood up too, but he looked more like a cornered animal than a threat. "Mom, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" My voice rose for the first time in the conversation. "That your wife sees me as an obstacle? That you've been lying about looking for a job while you plan to rob me? That you consider my life to be worth only the $500,000 you can get for my house?" "It's not like that," he yelled, but his eyes were filled with tears, with desperation, not sincerity. "Then tell me, Marcus." I walked up to him until we were face to face. "When Angelica said it was time to stop seeing me as your saintly mother and start seeing me as an obstacle, what was your response?" Silence. He knew he couldn't lie because I had the exact recording of that conversation. "Your response," I continued relentlessly, was, "You're right. It's time to think about us." Those were your exact words, Marcus. After 35 years of sacrificing for you, you decided it was time to sacrifice me. Marcus collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. For a moment, I thought repentance had finally arrived, the realization of what he had been doing. But Angelica hadn't given up. "Fine," she said, regaining some of her composure. "Let's say you have those recordings. What do you plan to do with them?" The question took me by surprise, not for its content, but for its tone. There was no panic, no pleading. There was defiance. "Excuse me?" I asked. "I'm asking you what you plan to do," she repeated, crossing her arms. "Because as far as I know, Marcus is still your son. Are you really going to destroy your own family for a house?" The audacity of her response left me speechless for a moment. Even after being completely exposed, she was still trying to manipulate me. "Destroy my family?" I repeated slowly. "Angelica, you two have already destroyed this family. I'm just defending myself." "Defending yourself?" she scoffed. "A 68-year-old woman alone with no family but us. What are you going to do, Marisol? Call the police? Report your only son?" There was something in her tone that put me on high alert. It wasn't just arrogance, it was confidence, as if she knew something I didn't. "If necessary," I replied. Angelica smiled, and that smile was pure malice. "And who's going to believe you? An old woman who lives alone, who by her own admission has been spying on her family, who has obvious problems with trust and paranoia." "I have proof." "You have illegally obtained recordings?" She interrupted me. "Recordings made without our consent on a property where we have a legal right of residence. Any mediocre lawyer would get them ruled inadmissible in 5 minutes." My heart began to beat faster. Was that true? Had my recordings lost their legal value because of how I got them? "Besides," Angelica continued, now walking around the table like a predator, "who's going to take a woman seriously who is clearly developing paranoid behaviors, spying on her own family, inventing conspiracies, socially isolating herself?" "I'm not socially isolating myself," I protested, but my voice sounded less certain. She stopped in front of me. "When was the last time you talked to a friend? When was the last time you left this house for something that wasn't strictly necessary? Marcus has told me how you've been behaving lately, the mood swings, the distrust, the forgetfulness." Marcus lifted his head, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke with something resembling his old certainty. "It's true, Mom. I've been worried about you. That's why we wanted you to sign those documents, to ensure that if your mental health continues to deteriorate, we have the legal tools to help you." Mental health deteriorating. They were building an alternative narrative where I was the villain of the story, the paranoid old woman who had misinterpreted loving gestures as criminal conspiracies. "You two know perfectly well there's nothing wrong with my mental health," I said, but I could feel doubt beginning to filter into my voice. "Oh, really?" Angelica sat down again, but now with the confidence of someone who controls the conversation. "A woman who installs secret cameras to spy on her family, who invents elaborate theories about theft and conspiracies, who refuses to sign basic legal documents out of paranoia." "They're not theories," I yelled. "I heard you planning everything." "You heard us having normal conversations about your future and your security," Marcus corrected. "Conversations that your paranoid mind interpreted as threats." It was brilliant, diabolically brilliant. They were completely turning the situation around, converting my discovery of their betrayal into evidence of my own supposed mental instability. "Albert," I said desperately. "You talked about Albert and the $25,000 to forge documents." "Albert is a real lawyer who's helping us with real legal paperwork," Angelica replied without blinking. "The $25,000 are his fees for a complex job of updating documentation, all completely legal." "And the retirement home thing? Selling the house?" Marcus sighed, as if he were talking to a spoiled child. "Mom, we talked about future options in case you ever need specialized care. It's something all responsible families consider." I felt as if the floor were opening up beneath my feet. Every piece of evidence I thought I had, every conversation I had recorded, they were reinterpreting as evidence of my own mental decline instead of their betrayal. But you said I was an obstacle," I murmured, feeling my confidence vanish. "We said that your resistance to planning your future was an obstacle to us helping you properly," Angelica corrected in a patient tone, as if speaking to a psychiatric patient. "Mom," Marcus came closer and put his hands on my shoulders, "we're worried about you. This behavior isn't normal. The paranoia, the accusations, spying on your own family. Maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional." "A professional, a psychiatrist. They wanted to make me seem crazy to invalidate any resistance to their plans. But then I remembered something they couldn't reinterpret or manipulate. "If everything is so innocent," I said, regaining some of my strength, "you won't mind showing those documents you want me to sign to an independent lawyer. Not Albert, someone I choose." The silence that followed gave me all the answer I needed. Angelica and Marcus looked at each other, and in that look, I saw the panic they had been hiding under their new manipulation strategy. "Of course," Angelica finally said, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. "Whenever you want." But I knew she was lying, and they knew that I knew she was lying. The war had entered a new phase. It was no longer just about fraudulent documents or stolen houses. It was about my sanity, my credibility, my right to be believed. And that was a war I was not willing to lose. The next few days were the strangest of my life. Marcus and Angelica had completely changed their strategy, but not toward honesty, toward something much more sinister. They were treating me as if I were mentally ill and needed specialized care. It all started that same afternoon when I heard Marcus make a phone call that chilled my blood. "Dr. Rodriguez, it's Marcus Jones, Marisol's son," he said from their room, but loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "I'm very worried about my mother's mental state. She's developed some very severe paranoid behaviors." Dr. Rodriguez had been my family doctor for 15 years, a woman I trusted completely and who knew my medical history better than anyone. "Yes, doctor, severe paranoia," Marcus continued. "She thinks we're conspiring against her, that we want to steal her house. She even installed secret cameras to spy on us. We're very worried." The horror of what he was doing paralyzed me. He was building a fake medical record about my supposed dementia, using my own discovery of their betrayal as evidence of mental illness. "When did it start?" Marcus paused, as if carefully considering his answer. "Gradually, over the last few months. But this week, it intensified a lot. Yesterday, she directly accused us of wanting to put her in a retirement home." Another pause. "Yes, doctor, I understand it's a sensitive matter, but frankly, we're scared. We don't know how far her paranoia can go." Scared. They had converted my discovery of their criminal plan into a threat against them. I ran to my room and locked the door. My hands were trembling as I opened the camera app on my phone. I needed to record this conversation too, but when I tried to access the audio from their room, I discovered there was a technical problem. That specific camera had no working audio. A coincidence? I highly doubted it. For the rest of the afternoon, Marcus and Angelica treated me with an exaggerated kindness that was more terrifying than their previous hostility. They spoke to me in soft voices, as if I were a small child or a very sick person. "Mom, do you feel okay?" Marcus would ask me every half hour. "Don't you have a headache? Don't you feel confused?" "You look a little pale, Marisol," Angelica would add. "Have you been sleeping well? Haven't you had any strange nightmares?" Every question was a trap. If I said I felt confused, I would confirm their narrative of mental decline. If I said no, they could interpret my denial as evidence that I wasn't aware of my own condition. That night, from my room, I heard them planning the next phase of their strategy. "Tomorrow I'm calling Dr. Rodriguez to schedule an urgent appointment," Angelica said. "We need a professional to officially document the deterioration of her mental state." "What if she refuses to go?" Marcus asked. "She can't refuse. We'll tell her it's a routine checkup for her blood pressure. Once she's in the office, we'll talk to the doctor privately to explain the real situation." "You think the doctor will believe us?" "Marcus, we're her family. We've been living with her, observing her behavior day by day. Besides, paranoia in older adults is very common. The doctor has seen cases like this before." They were right about one thing. Paranoia in older adults existed, and doctors saw it frequently. But what they couldn't fabricate were decades of medical history that demonstrated my perfect mental stability. Or maybe they could. The next day, Friday, Marcus announced at breakfast that he had scheduled a doctor's appointment for me. "It's just a routine checkup, Mom," he said with that new, condescending voice he had developed, "to check your blood pressure and make sure everything is okay." I don't need a checkup, I replied. I feel perfectly fine. Of course you feel fine, Angelica intervened. But at your age, it's important to have regular checkups. Besides, you've been a little different lately. More nervous, more distrustful. I'm not nervous or distrustful, I said firmly. I'm alert because I discovered my own family was betraying me. Marcus sighed dramatically, as if he were dealing with a difficult patient. Mom, please, nobody is betraying you. Those are exactly the ideas we need the doctor to check out. Ideas. They had reduced my discovery of their criminal conspiracy to ideas that needed medical evaluation. I'm not going to any doctor, I declared. Yes, you are, Marcus replied, and for the first time in days, his voice recovered some of its hardness. It's for your own good. And if I refuse? Angelica smiled with that fake sweetness she had perfected. Marisol, don't be difficult. It's just a routine doctor's appointment. And if I still refuse? The silence that followed was telling. I saw in their eyes that they had a plan for that contingency too. Well, Marcus finally said, we'd have to consider other options for your safety and ours. Other options. An involuntary psychiatric hold. They were probably thinking that. I understand, I said simply. That afternoon, while they were supposedly out shopping, I called Dr. Rodriguez directly. Doctor, it's Marisol Jones, I said when I finally got through to her. Marisol, what a coincidence you're calling. Your son was here yesterday, very worried about your mental state. My heart sank. Marcus had already planted the seeds of his false narrative. Doctor, I need to speak with you personally, but not at the appointment Marcus scheduled. In private. There was a pause. Marisol, do you feel safe in your house? Is your son treating you well? It was a loaded question. Dr. Rodriguez had experience with elder abuse, but Marcus had managed to position himself as the concerned son instead of the abuser. Doctor, my son and his wife are trying to steal my house using fraudulent documents. When I discovered them, they decided to make me look mentally incompetent to discredit my accusations. Another, longer pause this time. Marisol, those are very serious accusations. Do you have any proof of what you're saying? They destroyed all my evidence. They removed the security cameras, erased the recordings, manipulated my memory, making me believe I had imagined everything. And how do you know you didn't imagine it? Because an hour ago, I heard Marcus talking on the phone with Albert, the lawyer they're going to hire for the forgery. He mentioned a $3,000 down payment and said that Angelica could forge my signature if necessary. Dr. Rodriguez took notes as I spoke. Can you repeat exactly what you heard? I recounted the conversation word for word. I watched as her expression became more serious with each detail. Marisol, these are accusations of fraud and elder abuse. If they're true, we need to involve the authorities. But do you believe me? I've known your medical history for 15 years. You haven't shown any signs of cognitive decline or dementia. Your last neurological exam was completely normal. But Marcus told you I was developing paranoia. Marcus called me concerned. That's true. But after hearing your version, I think there's another explanation for your so-called paranoia. What is it? That it wasn't paranoia at all. It was correct intuition about a real threat. For the first time in days, I felt validated. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined anything. My instinct had been correct from the beginning. What do you suggest we do? I asked. First, we're going to do a full cognitive exam right here to officially document that you are in perfect mental faculties. Second, I'm going to give you the contact of a private detective specializing in cases of family abuse. Third, we're going to talk to a lawyer specializing in elder protection. And Marcus can't know anything about this until we have all the legal protections in place. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Rodriguez put me through a complete battery of cognitive tests, short and long-term memory, executive function, spatial and temporal orientation, abstract reasoning ability. I passed all the tests with perfect scores. Marisol, she finally said, you have the sharpest mind I've seen in a woman your age. There is absolutely no sign of cognitive decline. I can document that officially. I already am. This medical report clearly states that you are in full mental faculties and are perfectly capable of making legal and financial decisions. We returned home at noon. Marcus and Angelica greeted me with poorly disguised anxiety. How did it go, Mom? Marcus asked. What did the doctor say? She said I'm perfectly fine, I replied with a straight face, that there are no cognitive problems and that it was probably all just accumulated stress. I watched their faces light up with relief and something I recognized as disappointment. Stress? Angelica asked. Why stress? From living alone, from worrying about the future, from not having clarity about my legal documents, I improvised. The doctor suggested it might be a good idea to finally organize those papers you wanted me to sign. Marcus and Angelica exchanged a look of barely contained triumph. That's great news, Mom, Marcus said. So, are you ready to sign those documents? I think so, I lied. But the doctor suggested it would be good to review them calmly first, to fully understand what I'm signing. Of course, Angelica replied quickly. You have all the time you need. Perfect. We could review them together tomorrow afternoon. I want to be completely sure before I sign. Absolutely. Marcus smiled with that fake warmth I knew too well. But now I also had my own secret agenda. That afternoon, while they thought I was taking a nap, I was on the phone for hours. First with the private detective Dr. Rodriguez had recommended, then with the lawyer specializing in elder protection. Mrs. Jones, the detective told me, we need direct evidence of their fraudulent plan. Would you be willing to wear a hidden microphone to record their conversations? Is that legal? Perfectly legal to record conversations in your own home when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Then yes. Perfect. We'll install the equipment first thing in the morning. We'll also place hidden cameras in your living room and dining room. The lawyer was just as direct. With the recordings you get and the medical report from Dr. Rodriguez, we'll have a solid case not only to prevent the fraud, but to criminally prosecute your son and daughter-in-law. Criminal prosecution, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, financial elder abuse. We're talking about several years in prison. Several years in prison for Marcus, my son. Is there an alternative? I asked. Could we offer them a deal where they completely abandon their criminal plans in exchange for not pressing charges? But we would need solid evidence first to have negotiating power. That night, while Marcus and Angelica celebrated in whispers what they believed would be their imminent victory, I carefully planned the trap I was going to set for them. The next day, during our review of the documents, I would have high-quality recordings of everything they said. Finally, I would have the irrefutable evidence I needed. The hunter had officially become the hunted, but they didn't know it yet. Tuesday morning arrived with a crystal-clear light that seemed to portend the end of this nightmare. At 7 a.m, while Marcus and Angelica were still asleep, the private detective and a specialized technician arrived discreetly at my house. In less than an hour, they had installed high-quality microphones on my clothes and microscopic cameras in strategic locations in the living room and dining room. Everything was completely invisible, but capable of capturing every word and every gesture with perfect clarity. Remember, Mrs. Jones, the detective instructed me before leaving, try to get them to specifically confess to their forgery plans. We need them to say clearly that they are going to forge your signature or that they are going to use fraudulent documents. And if they get suspicious, act exactly as you have been acting. Be cooperative but cautious. They expect you to be that way after everything that has happened. At 2 p.m, just as we had agreed, we sat down at the dining table to review the documents. Marcus had spread all the papers on the table, and Angelica had a pen ready next to each page that required a signature. "All right, Mom," Marcus began with that exaggerated patience he had perfected. "We're going to review each document so you understand exactly what you're signing." Perfect, I replied, discreetly adjusting my blouse to ensure the microphone would pick up everything clearly. Marcus started with the first document, explaining it line by line. It was indeed a power of attorney, but it was worded in a way that would give them almost absolute control over my finances and property. This document, he explained, would allow us to handle your affairs if you ever couldn't do it yourself. And what exactly does couldn't do it myself mean? I asked. Angelica intervened. Well, if you had an illness, or if your memory started to fail, or if you simply decided it was too much work to handle everything alone. Or if you two decided my memory was failing? I asked with apparent innocence. Marcus tensed slightly. Why would you say that, Mom? Well, after what happened last week when you thought I was developing paranoia. That was different, he replied quickly. You were showing real symptoms of confusion. Real symptoms or convenient symptoms? The silence that followed was tense. I watched as Marcus and Angelica exchanged warning glances. I don't understand what you mean, Angelica finally said. I mean, it's very convenient that just when I discover you want me to sign documents I don't fully understand, I suddenly develop memory problems that justify you taking control of my life. Marcus leaned forward, his patience beginning to crack. Mom, no one is trying to control your life. No? Then explain to me why this document gives you the power to sell my house without my consent. It doesn't say that, Angelica protested. Yes, it does, I insisted, pointing to a specific clause. It says here that you can dispose of real estate as you see fit for the welfare of the grantor. Marcus sighed in frustration. Mom, that clause exists for emergency situations, if you needed expensive medical care, for example. Or if you decided I needed care in a retirement home. Why do you keep talking about retirement homes? Angelica's voice had a sharp edge. Because I heard you say that with the $500,000 from the sale of the house, you could find something affordable but comfortable for my last years. This time, the silence was absolute. Marcus had gone pale, and Angelica seemed to be quickly calculating her options. I don't know what you're talking about, Angelica finally muttered. Of course you do. Just as you know that Albert isn't a legitimate lawyer, but someone who specializes in forging documents. Marcus abruptly got up from the table. Where did you hear that name? On your phone call yesterday morning, when you told him the old lady was more alert than expected and that Angelica could forge my signature if necessary. The mask finally fell completely. Marcus looked at me with a mix of panic and fury that reminded me of the child who used to throw tantrums when he was caught in a lie. You've been spying on us, he accused. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. From my own son, who decided that robbing me was easier than working honestly. Angelica approached me with slow, deliberate movements. Marisol, no matter what you think you heard, you have no proof of anything. I have no proof? I got up from the table, feeling a strange calm come over me. Are you sure about that? Completely sure, she replied with arrogance, because we made sure you had no proof, like when we removed the security cameras overnight. Exactly, Marcus said, having regained some of his composure, believing he had won. Like when we erased all your imaginary recordings and replaced your USB drive. And like when you fabricated fake alibis for Tuesday morning? That too, Angelica admitted with a cruel smile. Marcus never had job interviews that day. He was here with me planning exactly how to handle a meddlesome old lady. And the WhatsApp messages with the companies? Fake, Marcus laughed. It's incredibly easy to fake WhatsApp conversations when you know how. So you admit that it was all a setup to make me believe I was crazy? We admit you're a stupid old woman who almost ruined a perfect plan, Angelica exploded. But it doesn't matter, because in the end, you're going to sign these documents anyway. And if I refuse? Marcus smiled with pure malice. Then we'll have to resort to Plan B, a fake medical certificate that declares you're not in the right mental state to handle your affairs. We have contacts who can arrange that for the right price. And then? Then Angelica walked up to me until she was inches from my face. We put you in the cheapest place we can find and sell this house to finance our future. Our future without you, Marcus added with absolute coldness. Because frankly, Mom, you've already served your purpose in our lives. There it was, the complete, clear, and irrefutable confession of their entire criminal plan. I see, I said simply. And you feel absolutely no remorse for betraying the woman who cared for and loved you. Remorse? Marcus laughed bitterly. For a woman who's had us living like parasites on her crumbs? This house is worth a fortune, and we've been living like beggars, waiting for your monthly handouts. Handouts of $700 a month, Angelica added with disdain, when we could be living like millionaires. Millionaires? I repeated. With my money? With the money that's rightfully ours, Marcus corrected. I'm your only son. This house should be mine by right. By right of having endured 35 years of your emotional manipulation, your maternal blackmail, your constant need for control. I see, I said, walking slowly toward the window. So, all of this is my fault? Completely your fault, Angelica confirmed. If you had been a less selfish mother, if you had given us access to your money voluntarily, none of this would have been necessary. I stayed silent for a long moment, looking out at the yard where I had taught Marcus to ride a bike, where we had played when he was a child, where I had dreamed that someday grandchildren would be running. Well, I finally said, turning to face them, I guess now I completely understand who you really are. And now that you understand, Marcus held the pen out to me, you can sign these documents and make all of this easier for everyone. I took the pen in my fingers and held it over the first page. You know what, Marcus? I told him with a smile he didn't know how to interpret. You're right about one thing. What? That I'm a stupid old woman. And then I dropped the pen on the table. But I'm not so stupid as to sign my own death sentence. The look of confusion on Marcus and Angelica's faces lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the front door opened and the private detective, 2 uniformed police officers, and my elder protection lawyer walked in. Good morning, the detective said in a professional and calm voice. I'm Detective Johnson. Marcus Jones and Angelica Williams are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, and elder financial abuse. The shock on their faces was absolute. Marcus stood frozen like a statue, while Angelica began to back away toward the kitchen as if she could somehow escape what was happening. This is impossible, Marcus murmured, looking at me as if I were a ghost. You have no proof of anything. I discreetly took the small microphone I had hidden under my blouse during the whole conversation and put it on the table next to the fraudulent documents. Actually, I have high-quality recordings of the entire conversation we just had. Recordings where you explicitly confess to your plan to forge my signature, steal my house, institutionalize me against my will, and obtain fake medical certificates to have me declared mentally incompetent. The lawyer walked up to the table and began to collect the documents as he explained. In addition to the audio recordings, we have high-definition video of this entire conversation, thanks to the cameras we installed this morning while you were asleep. We also have a complete medical report from Dr. Rodriguez that categorically states that Mrs. Jones is in perfect mental faculties and is completely capable of making legal decisions. Angelica finally found her voice, although it sounded broken and desperate. This is an illegal trap. You recorded us without our consent. False, the detective replied with professional patience. Mrs. Jones has the absolute right to record conversations on her own property when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Besides, you voluntarily confessed all the details of your conspiracy without any coercion. Marcus finally reacted, but not with remorse, with blind fury. This is all your fault, old lady. If you had been a normal mother, if you had treated us like real family instead of constantly controlling us, none of this would have been necessary. Marcus, I said with a calm that surprised me, for 35 years, I worked double shifts as a nurse to give you everything you needed. I gave up rebuilding my romantic life to focus completely on your education and well-being. I paid for your college in full. I supported you financially every time you lost a job. I opened the doors of my house to you when you had nowhere to live." One of the police officers began to read Marcus his rights as he put on the handcuffs, but I continued to speak because I needed to say these words that had been growing in my chest for weeks. All I asked for in return was respect, honesty, and something resembling the filial love any mother deserves. Instead, you chose to see me as an obstacle to your financial prosperity, as an inconvenient old woman you could manipulate, rob, and discard when I was no longer useful to you. Angelica, as the second police officer also put handcuffs on her, yelled in desperation, "We took care of you! We lived with you! We kept you company! We helped you with everything!" "You took care of me like vultures care for a dying animal," I retorted, without raising my voice, waiting patiently for the right moment to devour the remains. "The only difference is, you didn't wait for me to die naturally. You decided to speed up the process through fraud and psychological manipulation." The detective explained to me as they led Marcus and Angelica toward the door. "Mrs. Jones, with the evidence we've collected, the prosecutor is prepared to file charges for criminal conspiracy, attempted fraud, document forgery, elder financial abuse, and psychological manipulation with the intent to mentally incapacitate a victim. We're talking about sentences that could range from 5 to 15 years in prison for each of them." "And if I wanted to offer them some kind of deal?" I asked, feeling that last vestige of maternal love that never seemed to completely die. My lawyer intervened. "We could consider a deal where they renounce any future claim on your property or inheritance, stay at a minimum distance of 500 feet from you permanently, and complete rehabilitation programs for family abuse. In exchange," he continued, "you could consider not insisting on the maximum criminal sentence." Marcus, from the front door, with his hands cuffed behind his back, looked at me with eyes that mixed hatred and desperate pleading. "Mom, please think about it. I'm your only son. Are you really going to destroy your own family for a house?" The question that had been tormenting me for days finally had a clear and definitive answer. "Marcus, you destroyed this family the moment you decided my life was worth only the dollars you could get for my house. I'm simply protecting what's left of my dignity and my right to live in peace for the years I have left." After Marcus and Angelica were taken away, I was alone in my house for the first time in months. The silence was profound, but not terrifying. It was the silence of recovered peace, of eliminated danger, of betrayal finally exposed and punished. I sat on my favorite armchair, the same one where I had so often comforted Marcus as a child, where I had read him stories, where we had watched movies together during his adolescence. Now it was simply my armchair again, in my house, in my life that finally belonged entirely to me. 3 months later, Marcus and Angelica accepted the deal we offered them. They gave up all rights to my property, agreed to stay away from me permanently, and completed rehabilitation programs. In return, they served only 18 months in prison instead of the 10 years they could have faced. Some people ask me if I didn't regret being so hard on my only son. My answer was always the same. I didn't regret raising him when he was a defenseless child who needed love. I only regretted not having understood sooner that maternal kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction. Now I live peacefully in my home, surrounded by neighbors who have become my new chosen family. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood or legal documents, but by mutual respect, honesty, and genuine love. And when I look back at everything I went through, I realize that the woman who emerged from that experience is stronger, wiser, and infinitely freer than the one who entered it. Sometimes, to save yourself, you have to be willing to lose the ones you thought you loved the most. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.